الحمد لله رب العالمين. الحمد لله حمد الشاكرين. الحمد لله دائما وأبدا. الحمد لله على كل حال، ونعوذ بالله من حال أهل النار. اللهم لك الحمد والشكر كما ينبغي لجلال وجهك وعظيم سلطانك. لك الحمد اللهم على كل نعمة أنعمتها علينا يا رب العالمين. اللهم لك الحمد على نعمة الإسلام. لك الحمد اللهم على كل ركعة ركعناها. لك الحمد اللهم على كل سجدة سجدناها. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك وأنعم وأكرم على سيد الخلق، حبيبنا وشفيعنا وقرة أعيننا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك عليه عدد من طاف بالبيت الحرام وعدد من صام وقام. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك عليه في الأولين وفي الآخرين وفي الملأ الأعلى إلى يوم الدين. We praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and we thank him. Join me, my dear brothers and sisters, in thanking Allah. We thank you, O Allah. We thank you, O Allah, for the blessings of our lives. We thank you, O Allah, for the imperfect yet beautifully curated by you, O Allah, lives that we live. We thank you, O Allah, for our families, our parents, no matter the state of their marriage, our siblings, despite how annoying they often are. We thank you, O Allah, for the blessing of our community. We thank you, O Allah, for our cars, even though they're overdue on an oil change. We thank you, O Allah, for the blessing of winter to remind us of the blessing of warmth. And we thank you, O Allah, for giving us places like California to vacation where we just can't tolerate it anymore. We thank you, O Allah, for the blessings of the past, even if we don't remember them. Your first step, your first bite of food, the first time you said mama or baba or even Allah. We thank you, O Allah, for those blessings that we lived, but we don't even feel them anymore. We thank you, O Allah, for the blessings of the present, many of which don't even feel like blessings. But Ya Allah, you know better that even when we don't recognize your blessings, it doesn't change that they're already blessings. We thank you, O Allah, for the blessings of the future. Those blessings that have yet to come, that feel so unguaranteed, but because you are Allah, we know that they will come. And so we thank you, O Allah, for those very blessings that have yet to come. But above all else, join me, my dear brothers and sisters, in thanking Allah for the blessing of La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. I'll ask you something my teachers told me to ask myself every day. Who would I be without La ilaha illallah? Where would I be without Muhammadur Rasulullah? What would my life, what would the fabric of my society look like without La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah? And so we thank you, O Allah, for gifting us with Islam. And we beg of you, O Allah, to make us from those who live and love and die upon La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. My dear brothers and sisters, all of this to say Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. How are folks doing? Maybe I can make a recommendation. If I can ask everybody on the, I don't know how it is on the brother's side, but on the sister's side rather, on the brother's side, if everyone can just move their chair up, just because I know it's a little bit tight in the back. تَفَسَّحُوا فِي الْمَجَالِسِ يَفْسَحِ اللَّهُ لَكُمْ. Just make room for the brothers in the back, inshallah ta'ala. I think we're good on the sister's side, but if you feel otherwise, then inshallah the volunteers, the team members will let you know. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow, you know, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives the description of Jannah, he says, إِخْوَانًا عَلَى سُرُرٍ مُتَقَابِلِينَ. That there's a moment in Jannah, and I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to honor us to live that moment, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala places us on the thrones and the sofas of Jannah. We can't talk about this in like an imaginary made in Disney type of way. Like this is real. This is wa'd of Allah. It's a promise of Allah just to make the cut to be those people. إِخْوَانًا عَلَى سُرُرٍ مُتَقَابِلِينَ. That there's a people who will be on the thrones of Jannah, on the sofas of Jannah, just chilling and facing one another, engaging with one another. That this conversation, inshallah ta'ala, it extends to that conversation in Jannah, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. All of this really, subhanAllah, as an introduction for a conversation that I knew that we needed to have as a community, but I didn't. I was just telling Sheikh Ubaydullah, who's someone who's literally like an older brother to me, and someone who is also a teacher to me and to many of us. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to reward him and bless him. I don't know if you all know the history of Sheikh Ubaydullah and his cars. We all have a bad relationship with something. But one of the benefits of Sheikh Ubaydullah's relationship with his cars is that he gets places very fast. So Sheikh was literally out of town before this giving a talk. And he had with him his children as well, mashallah. And he came here fast enough where only Allah prevented him from getting a ticket. And so we're grateful to have Sheikh Ubaydullah here with us. And we ask Allah to make us from those who feel the worth of our teachers when we're with them. Because our teachers are with us for only some time. Just yesterday I was, subhanAllah, Sheikh, just yesterday I was blessed to see a small clip of one of my teachers who's passed away. And it was like a 30-second clip of him, rahmatullah alayhi, rahmatullah, and I kept replaying it and replaying it and replaying it. And I was like, mashabat. I just couldn't be satisfied. I couldn't quench that inner spiritual thirst I had to just be with my teacher more. So as we have our teachers like Sheikh Ubaydullah, like the mashayikh here, Sheikh Ali, Sheikh Ahmed, Sheikh Jamal, and Sheikh Walid, just as we're blessed to have them, to take benefit and to reap the rewards of the mashayikh that we have and to benefit from them. I was talking to the sheikh and I was mentioning, subhanAllah, I was like, when I thought of the topic, I was like, this is a topic that we need to talk about, because we're a lot of us, particularly when we think about what's happening on a global effort, it's been like phases, right? It's like first it was devastation, then it was outrage, and then it was just rage, and then it was sadness, and then it was hopelessness. And then it reaches a point where you just begin to feel, let's just be honest with ourselves, sometimes we begin to feel a little numb. Is that fair? We begin to feel a little numb. The numbers go, we're beyond the Nakba. It's over 20,000 people. The pictures of children could not have been created by Hollywood at this point. It's just, it's beyond disturbing to see what we see, and yet the heart has become numb. And a part of it is that that's what hopelessness does. When you reach a point of hopelessness, your heart loses sight of what victory or success can look like. And so what's incredibly beautiful, and here we are 100 days away from Ramadan, is that Allah Ta'ala utilizes the Quran to redefine things for us, to redefine happiness, to redefine wealth, to redefine peace and tranquility, to redefine justice and liberation and power. And one of the things that Allah Ta'ala redefines for us in the Quran is success. And one of the greatest depictions of how Allah Jalla Jalaluh redefines success for us in the Quran is through the story of Ashab al-Ukhdud, or the people of the trenches. And what I was mentioning to the Sheikh is that I approached this because I knew that we communally needed to revisit the definition of success. But as I was preparing for our conversation today, wallahi, I didn't know how much I needed to revisit this and how healing it would be for me to spend time with the struggles of those people and that young boy. And subhanAllah, the closest thing that the ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam has to the boy in the story of the boy and the king and the people of the trenches is you all. You're in exactly that category. Young people living through crisis and tragedy, living through indescribable oppression and injustice. And Allah Ta'ala has in so many ways given us an opportunity in the way that He gave to the boy in the story. But I don't want to kill the vibe, Sheikh. So I'm going to hand it over for you I want you to get us started. Introduce to us the boy and the king. Maybe even if I can trouble you, Sheikh, forgive me, but lay the landscape of the circumstances of that time and introduce us a little bit to what the intent was behind bringing the boy into the picture and kind of how things evolved from there, inshallah.
الرحمن الرحيم إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه أعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا فمن يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله ثم أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. A great favor of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala upon me. I get to be a part of such a blessed assembly. You know, people that could be anywhere doing any number of things that have voluntarily chosen to come to the house of Allah in anticipation of gaining knowledge and also suhbah, companionship that will increase them in their relationship with Allah and hopefully increase them in their love for the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I look upon this gathering and see my inclusion in it as a sign that inshallah Allah intends some good for me. I want to thank my children for hanging with me today. We had an engagement earlier in Indianapolis, and I said to them this morning, you guys want to take a road trip with me? And with no hesitation, Bilal Taraddud, both of them said in unison, yes. I said, it's going to be a quick turnaround, no problem. Their mother just called as we were pulling up to the Masjid and said, how is it going? And I could tell she was expecting something ominous. How is it going? My daughter said, Mom, it's like a party. I said, yeah, Dad taking care of business today, mashallah. And I want to thank my brother Tariq, Sheikh Tariq, Musleh, for giving me a very generous introduction, sometimes too generous whenever he says, my older brother. I'm not that old, man. My older brother, the Sheikh.
Bigger by 1 day. It's still bigger.
SubhanAllah. And I want to echo his sentiments about this story and value that a story like this contains for our community, especially at this time. This story is mentioned in an authentic hadith of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. And in the hadith, so you know the asbab al-wurud, the circumstance that surrounds the hadith of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. Muslims, I said sallallahu alayhi wasallam, my son, peace be upon him. Alayhi wasallam. Muslims were experiencing persecution. And one of the things one must understand about persecution is that they say persecution is actually not the biggest threat to religious faith. Apathy born out of irrelevance is the biggest threat to religious faith. Often you will find that people are more connected to identities that they are persecuted for. So the Muslims in Mecca were being persecuted. And although they had great faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they were kind of, when will the help of Allah come? And the Prophet ﷺ leaned forward while speaking with them. He was reclining on the Kaaba. He leaned forward, telling them, informing them, your community is not the first community of believers. We're persecuted. Started narrating to them the story of the boy, the magician, and the king. And I'm going to we were just reviewing the story. My son said, Dad, review the story with me. I'm like your audience. Go ahead. Go ahead. Just reviewing the story on our way here. And the king had a magician. And it is often the case that people in positions of power have what's called a retinue or a cabinet. People with them that give validity to their leadership, to their rule. In the ancient period, these were often magicians because the magicians could deceive people. In our time, it's the media. The media has taken the place of this disguisery of magicians that give legitimacy to things that are sometimes wholly and completely illegitimate. And the magician, who was kind of like the king's right-hand man, he started to, get old. And he told the king, you should, find me a protege, somebody that I can instruct, somebody that I can teach. I'll show him how to do the magic so that when I'm unable to perform the magic, this young man can take my place. And so the king chose someone smart, someone capable, someone bright, someone quick-witted. And the young boy started studying magic with the magician. The Prophet ﷺ even mentioned that the magician was so overbearing in his instruction that he would punish the boy sometimes by beating him. And the boy would be going to the magician and back to his house. One day, while going to the magician, he saw a rahib. He saw a monk. The monk was in a cloister. Right now, the Prophet ﷺ, he said, La ruhbaniyata fil Islam. We are not a community of monasticism. But in earlier muwahidun communities, earlier communities of Tawheed, people would completely withdraw from society and focus on devotion. So the man was a monk. And the boy would see him going to and fro, and he decided to ask the monk, "Can I come in and spend time with you?" When the boy is spending time with the monk explains to him that he worships Allah. And he starts instructing the boy, right? The boy, continuing his lessons with the magician, would sometimes arrive to the magician late. And sometimes he would arrive home late. And the magician would punish him for this. And the old man, the monk, he said, well, if anyone asks you, if the magician asks you, tell them you were late dealing with your parents. If your parents ask you, tell them you were late dealing with the magician. However, one day, and I'm condensing the story in the interest of time, the boy feeling a strong pull, a strong inclination, right? The boy was in conflict. This is a very relevant part of the story. He's learning magic, but he's learning haqq at the same time. And he comes upon the townspeople, and they're afraid of like a beast, like afraid of this creature. And the boy picks up a rock, and he says, "Oh Allah, if what I'm learning from the monk is true, allow me to slay the beast." He says, Bismillah, he casts the stone. The parallels are endless. He says, Bismillah, he casts the stone. He slays, he smites the beast. So you tell these stories, you got to use biblical language. He smites the beast. Right? He slays the beast. At this, the boy's popularity, the boy's renown as a believer begins to grow, right? And the boy wholly dedicates himself to Haqq. So much so that the magician tells him, you have overtaken me. You, in terms of your access to truth, the way that you are now possessed by the truth, not simply that you possess the truth, you are possessed by al-Haqq, subhanahu wa ta'ala. You are going to be maftoon, are going to be tested. If the king apprehends you, don't tell him anything about me. The monk tells him, if the king captures you, even if he tortures you, no matter what he does to you, don't tell him anything about me. And the boy was kind of going about his activity, and people started coming to him for shifa. People would come to him, people that had leprosy, people that were blind, people that were lame. I'm not talking about lame like, that's not a sickness to be a lame. I'm talking about like he can't He can't walk. Lame as in can't walk, right? Being lame was a sickness we'd all, no, I'm just kidding. People that were lame, people that had, people that were lepers, people that were blind, they would come to him, and by the permission of Allah, the boy would call upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to provide them with shifa, and they would be cured. One day, one of the ministers of the king affected with blindness. He lost his sight. And people were telling him, you should go to this young boy. Provide you with a cure. He might be. So the minister went to the boy. The boy called upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to cure his blindness, and the man became sighted. He was able to see again. When the king saw him, of course, he's close to the king. The king saw him. He said, who restored your sight? The minister, maybe not being apprised of what he wasn't supposed to say, he said, the Lord of the boy. He didn't say the boy. That the Lord of the boy restored my sight. He said, Lord of the boy? King, I left out a very important part of the story. The king used to claim divinity. King used to claim that he was a god, that he was a deity. King, is there a Lord other than me? Bring the boy to me. So,
Sheikh, I know you're driving us through the story, but in typical fashion, I want to highlight something. If you can just shed light on it.
Bismillah. Go ahead.
So I think what's interesting is how many of you have heard the story before? Raise your hands.
Okay. So okay. Why'd you tell me that?
No. Okay. So the reason I'm asking that, and there's many of us that are learning it for the first time, and neither is a bad. It's all khair. It's all khair, right? But one of the things that we learn from our teachers is that at every moment of your life, different stories of our tradition speak to you differently. And Allah Ta'ala, from today till tomorrow, I kid you not, if you revisit the story of the boy, the magician, and the king, tomorrow Allah Ta'ala will have in you, or have for you in that story, a benefit that he did not gift to you today through that story. And yet sometimes when we look at these stories, we remember them from like Saturday school, Sunday school, that one really dramatic cartoon movie. How many of you guys have seen the dramatic cartoon movie? Shout out to the makers of that, people that were ahead of their time, right? Like that. Maybe that's what we revisit. And what I'm hoping, the reason why I wanted us to kind of slow down for a little bit is because we need to re-engage with these stories in a way that's relevant to who we are today. And in a way that's relevant to where you are in your life right now. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when he talks to us as to why he gives us these stories in the Quran, كَذَلِكَ نَقُصُّ عَلَيْكَ مِنْ أَنْبَاءِ مَا قَدْ سَبَقَ. Right? When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, I have given you the news of what happened before. Why does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala do that? لِنُثَبِّتَ بِهِ فُؤَادَكَ. So that my heart and your heart can be made firm and granted strength and given comfort from the stories of those before that. So if we're just visiting a story informationally, right? If we're just listening to this and saying like, bro, like I kind of sort of already know the end of the story, we miss out on what this story is meant to be. It's not informational, it's transformational. It's meant to evolve with us as we grow. And so, it is less important to me that we complete the story and more important that the story completes us. Because Allah Ta'ala knows how much we are in need of completion and how much our marriages are in need of completion and how much our spiritual selves are in need of completion. And so Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala gifts us these stories to complete us, to heal us, and to rectify us. So if we were to just use one of the things that the Sheikh mentioned, I use the word khatir or dangerous thing lightly, but one of the dangerous things about Sheikh Ubaydullah in a positive, dangerous sense is that he'll throw gems like casually. So you have to be on the lookout for these gems that he's sharing. And one of the things that the Sheikh mentioned, I promise I'm not just typing you up for fun, Sheikh. But one of the things that
You see, I'm looking at him thinking, where's he going with this?
he's like,
Where's he going?
what one of the things that the Sheikh mentioned in talking about the age of the child and how he was selected is that the king was looking for someone that was intelligent, that was gifted, someone that was ahead of the game. And what this tells us, my dear brothers and sisters, is that our intelligence is a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but it is a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we can utilize to elevate our place with Allah. And it's also a gift that, if it is not appropriately channeled, can be utilized against us, can even be weaponized by the world against around us against us through things like social media. So when one of the challenges of being a highly intelligent individual, which y'all can tell me more about, is that your intelligence sometimes allows you to feel a level of comfortability with navigating life. But this very intelligence of the boy was a means of him being put in a very difficult and complicated position, in which, in the process of him thinking that he was climbing up the ladder and becoming, you have to like contextualize a little bit, he was going to become the magician of the nation. He was going to be the next big thing. And yet, as he was being educated of this, he was so grounded in awareness of his intelligence that he was able to see khair even in the most unanticipated of places. That's why true intelligence is humility. الذكاء الحقيقي التواضع, the scholars say, because you have to be humble enough to search for the light of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the most unexpected and the most unanticipated places. He could have just seen the rahib, the monk, and said that's just a monk. And if you think about the imagery of a monk, it's not anything that's particularly appealing. But because of his how inquisitive he was, because of how genuine he was, because of how humble he was, at the sight of the rahib, he saw an opportunity worth taking.
Could you imagine that? I mean, for one of us who is pursuing a well-trodden path to upward mobility, you know, following a professional trajectory that should land us, should lead us to great financial success, recognition within our community, unlimited marriage proposals, right, etc. And then you see someone that has turned away from the world, someone that appears intentionally disinterested in or elected trajectory. How many of us would have the humility to suggest that maybe this person knows something about life that I don't? Many of us would probably see someone like that and think, "Man, what do you know? I'm at Harvard Law, and you're a bum. I go to U Chicago, or I just got in the booth, I just got in the Wharton, and my path appears to be gilded." I mean, it's personal story about that. When I was younger, I used to play basketball. If you watch me play now, you couldn't tell. And I was never very talented, but I really loved the game. I practiced, assiduously. I practiced a lot. And there was a guy who used to cut hair, a barber in my neighborhood. He had, played like Division II college basketball. He was also a guard, and he would try to give me pointers on my game. And I was so arrogant. I used to say, "Look, let me stick to playing basketball. You stick to cutting hair." I said, "Do I come in the barbershop and look at you while you're cutting and say, 'Hey, you're pushing this line and back'? No. So don't tell me how to play basketball." And he would look at me and say, "You're so..." It's so foolish. I was better than you are now. And I'm telling you, these are some things you could do to improve. But there was a lack of humility. So that, no. I'm embarrassed by how I play basketball now. But and it was a mark, and I say this just for the purpose of illustration. It was a mark of a lack of intelligence. Because an intelligent person would, what do you see that do you know any drills? Do you know what do you see? What flaws do you see in my game? I didn't have the humility. I didn't have the intelligence.
You reminded me, my Sheikh, Rahmatullah alayhi, the one I was referring to earlier, one of our teachers. I used to go with him to Jum'ah khutbah, and you just have to imagine, like I was just like 13, 14, things like that. I would go with him to Jum'ah khutbah, and he would ask me afterwards, usually when we were driving to like grab lunch or something. He's like, "What did you take from the khutbah, and what could I have delivered better?" And it's like, you're my sheikh, and you're asking me that. So I think the intention was to slow down, because sometimes our own intelligence can be blinding to us, and to utilize the opportunity, because Allah, it's a rahib, right? It's a monk. You can imagine that a monk is disheveled. You can imagine that a monk is not considered at a high level in society. They're not people that everyone is excited to see. Yet this boy, with all of his intelligence, and like the Sheikh mentioned, with the opportunity presented to him for a very clear path to a luxurious life. You know, one of the things that I came across, Sheikh, was that simply by the king choosing him, his family had it made financially for generations to come, that it was set. And he was willing to abandon all of that the minute that he tasted that sweetness of Iman. The other thing that you mentioned was that moment when he threw the rock at the animal. And some even say it was a mere pebble, that out of desperation he grabbed it in front of him and he threw it. What did he say? His moment of dua indicated his fitrah. The moment of dua was, "Oh Allah, if what the rahib is saying is true, if what the monk is saying is true, then allow it through that allow it to become apparent to me." What he did not say is, if what the magician is saying is true, indicating that his heart had already recognized the truth, because his heart was ready to receive the truth. One time I was in Medina, and one of the brothers, he called me and he says, "It sounds like Islam is just another blind faith, just another blind faith that we just follow blindly." And I went to my sheikh and I told this to my sheikh, and I was concerned because I didn't know how to answer him. He said, "Go back to the brother and tell him it is not that Islam is a blind faith. It's that some of us choose to be blind to faith ourselves. It's the inability," right? The scholars of spirituality, the scholars of tazkiyah, they talk about the difference between, and we've mentioned this before, basar and basira, the ability to see with our eyes versus the ability to see with our heart. The boy had already tasted the sweetness of Iman, but he utilized that moment to affirm his faith. And your heart needs to be ready enough to see the light of Allah. That's why when you see these videos on your Instagram, on your social media of these people in Gaza, they are seeing things with basira. When you hear a mother doing zagharit, like it is her son's wedding, but it is the burial of her martyr son, what is that? That is a person that sees Jannah with their heart before their eyes even witness Jannah. That is what it means to see with the heart. The boy was able to see Jannah, to see the Iman of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala before it was presented in front of him. But I do want us to kind of continue from this moment, because you even mentioned the minister, and the minister was in this desperate need for the minister was in desperate need of relief. The sheikh mentioned that he had lost his sight. In another narration, it says that the minister that the boy was able to cure by the permission of Allah, he had not seen a single day in his life. He was born blind. And so he was a minister that had lived his entire life blind, but now, because of the dua of the boy and the da'wah of this boy, and the boy was very strategic. When people came to him for healing, they did not leave except knowing that it is Allah who is Ash-Shafi, and Allah the one who cures them. And again, what do we need to be doing? Registering this to our life. How unapologetic how he was, how firm in faith he was, how ready he was to stand for the truth and speak for the truth in every scenario, no matter how it benefited or harmed him. And now the minister goes back and he's full of sight, and the minister is a believer. And when asked, who is it that cured you? He says, Allah cured me. And as the Sheikh mentioned, says, do you mean me? Like I'm the one who cured you? He says, my Lord and your Lord is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This firmness of faith, even from the minister, how long had the minister been a Muslim for? The minister had been a Muslim for less than a day. He's just going back to his first day of work, finally having sight after an entire life of blindness. And he goes back and he says, my Lord and your Lord is Allah, and the same Allah that prevented me from seeing my whole life, now I am seeing by the will and the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This type of firmness of faith, my dear brothers and sisters, this is what success looks like. It means no matter what the eyes see, real success is what the heart is able to see from the light of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I do want to hand it back over to you, Sheikh, because this is where we begin to see the king pushing back on the truth and the king taking things into his own hands to try to extinguish the light of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Interesting, because when the king summons the boy fearlessly stands before the king and declares his belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, immediately starts to torture the boy. Boy, under the pressure of the torture, mentions the monk. Even though the monk said, do not mention me under circumstances. He mentions the monk. The monk is brought forward. The monk is told to recant his faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He refuses to do so. And he's cut in half. Just senselessly, brutally murdered for public consumption. Now, you were talking about parallels. Usually, when somebody is murdered, tortured, humiliated, this is not about inflicting pain on the person being murdered. This is supposed to be a deterrent. This is supposed to strike fear in the hearts of anybody who witnesses this punishment, so that they too know, if you want to consider faith, bad idea. Bad idea. Now, what this made me think about was, I've talked to many young Muslims. Israel started indiscriminately killing people in Gaza. And some of them have asked me pointedly, are praying to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we are being shown the deaths of our co-religionists, our brothers, our sisters, in high definition, in 4K. I almost feel like, and I said, wait, stop you right there. Let me stop you right there. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, Inna Allaha ma'as sabirin. God is with those who are patient. Patience is only required in two circumstances. Either there is something you want that you don't have, and you have to be patient. Or there is something you have that you don't want. You have to be patient. But when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Inna Allaha ma'as sabirin, Anyone who finds him or herself in that circumstance has a special access to the divine that a person who isn't in that circumstance, maybe one of us is in a state of ni'mah, we're not in that circumstance. Our test might be shukr, gratitude. But a person in that circumstance has a special access to the divine. And I said, this is why we see what we see on behalf of our brothers and sisters in Gaza, because they have that special access. It's those of us that have the luxury, have the privilege of witnessing this at a distance. We are experiencing doubt in our iman. They're not experiencing doubt in theirs. When I thought about the monk, what he experienced, so you okay, man? You just going through a thing. I see you on the floor, like you all right, man? You came to the masjid to break dance. What's going on, man? You good? Bismillah. Those of us watching, just like those of us listening to the story, that kind of faith might strike us as incomprehensible. I don't even understand, and you might not understand unless you're in that position in which you are one of the sabirin that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives his ma'iyya. God is with you. So whenever I think about the king pushing back, it's almost like he pushed back, but in their state, it peace their iman, right? وَقَالُوا حَسْبُنَا اللَّهُ وَنِعْمَ الْوَكِيلُ. God is enough for us and he is our guarantor. But this is what happens to the mazloom, right? The person that can identify will experience doubt. The person that can't, it's like, how could that? I just don't understand. Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam is telling this to a group of Sahaba, Ridwan alayhim ajma'in, that are persecuted, are beleaguered. So this resonates, this registers. And I'm hoping that we can also, get that Bayt al-Qasid, get that, even though our situation might be comparatively easy. Like we might be living in a comparatively um, privileged or luxurious position. It is still a benefit to us to study the faith of those who are in positions of difficulty.
No, and I appreciate that so much. And what happens after that is very powerful. Uh, and that is that after the boy, who by the way, subhanAllah, in some narrations it says that his name is Wallah. But in fact, the scholars they say that the lack of knowing of the exact timing of when this happened, right? Like, does anybody know exactly when the story of the boy, the magician, and the king happened? Anybody know? There is not a consensus on when it happened. Generally speaking, it's said to have happened sometime, perhaps after Sayyidina Isa alayhi salam was elevated and the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, somewhere between that time. There is not a consensus on what his name is. There is not even a consensus on where exactly that took place. And the scholars of our tradition, they tell us that that is the case because Allah Ta'ala wants us to know that this is something that will happen again and again and again. And history repeats itself. At every time, there will be someone imposing a message. At every time, there will be someone that is enforcing injustice. At every time, there will be a people that will be providing legitimacy to that injustice. And at every waking moment, my dear brothers and sisters, there will be a people who will be like the boy. There will be a people who stand firm like the boy. What's fascinating that happens after that is that the boy witnesses before his eyes his own teacher completely destroyed and losing his life from a dunyawi sense in front of his eyes. And he sees that the same thing happens to the minister. And now the king is trying to like not look bad because it's a 14-year-old kid. In some narrations, it says that he was 12. In others, it says he was 14. And here is this little ghulam, this young boy, and he's trying the king is trying his best to dismantle this boy from being a factor. So what does he do? He says, go ahead and take this boy to the highest of the mountains of our nation and throw him from the top of that mountain. And this is what,
give him a chance to deny his Lord.
yes, yeah.
If he denies, release him.
Because
If
why,
he doesn't,
but why
throw him
does he
off.
want that, Sheikh? This is powerful. Why does he want the boy to denounce? Because if he were to denounce, that same boy that right now is his greatest enemy would become his greatest asset.
Do you denounce Hamas?
We don't deny. That's a conversation we'll keep for the Q&A, inshallah.
But denunciation. It's no. I mentioned that intentionally because
Absolutely.
when a person reject, to recant, to denounce, it lends legitimacy to whatever their claim is. It's almost a non-starter. When a person says, well, before we say anything, this lends legitimacy to my aggression. This lends legitimacy to my position, right? So if you, at the very least, are willing to condemn, if you're at the very least willing to denounce, then it justifies my aggression. Well, I'm only being aggressive toward that which you're denouncing, right? So give him an opportunity to denounce his Lord. If he doesn't, kill him, throw him off of the cliff.
And this idea of giving him that chance, and I love what you're highlighting, because it's like the minute that he would have denounced it would have been providing legitimacy to the king in and of itself and reaffirming the authority of the king. Sometimes power is not just in what we choose to do, but power is also in what we choose not to do. By choosing to actively stand against injustice and stand firmly on our faith, it's a move, but also to actively make sure that we're not falling into the traps that are around us, it itself is a move, right? Like, even if we were to just think about the parallel for a second and think about when people say, but why are you really gonna like boycott Starbucks? Like, does it really even matter, right? Like, why are you really gonna do this? These are things that don't actually matter. They don't, quote unquote, make a difference. But what it is a statement. It's a reflection of your loyalty. It's a reflection of a position that you're taking. And when we saw the boy on the top of the moment, on the top of the mountain, you have to remember, when we go through these stories, what do we know? We know the end of the story. The boy, when he's on top of that mountain, he has full iman. But him having full iman does not change the fact that, for all intents and purposes, someone thrown off of a mountain should do what? Should die. Someone that's thrown off of a mountain should die. And this is re-emphasized by the dua of the boy on top of the king. Anybody know what dua the boy did on top of the king? What was the dua that the boy made on top of the king? On top of the mountain, rather. What was the dua? Najashi, what's the dua? Okay, maybe just a little bit more water and I'll come back to you. He says, Allahumma kfinihim bima shi't. Oh Allah, handle them in the way that you find most appropriate. How wild is that dua? Imagine, Allahumma kfinihim bima shi't. Oh Allah, handle them in the way that you find most befitting. It is within the capacity of Allah to allow it to be that what is most appropriate is what? That the boy dies, and that all of those people die. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, وَلَا يَظْلِمُ رَبُّكَ أَحَدًا. Allah does not wrong anybody, and whatever Allah wills goes. Even the boy on top of the mountain, Allah ta'ala made the mountain shake when the boy's heart was not shaking. The boy's heart was firm. Oh Allah, do as you see fitting. Oh Allah, do what you see to be best. And Allah ta'ala shook the mountain and trembled the mountain, and the soldiers of the king fell, and the boy did the most illogical thing from a dunyawi perspective that a person could do. He casually strolled back into the king's palace and stood right in front of the king. And now the king responds and he says, what happens? And again, there's so many layers of parallel. I encourage you, wallahi, to sit with the story. He says, what happened to the friends that you went out with? Just imagine this. The king is saying to the boy, you went out with your friends. Who did he go out with? The soldiers of the king. He says, no, 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 those are not my people. You went out with your friends. Where are your friends that you went out with? And he says, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala handled them in the manner that is most befitting. Then the king says, okay, take him to the ocean and take him on a pathetically weak boat and wait till you are in the deepest depths of the ocean and then throw him overboard into the ocean where he cannot swim back. And again, the exact same thing happens. He comes back, and what does the king say again? What happened to the friends that you went out with? What happened to the friends that you went out with? The boy, Wadah, at the situation, develops a courage that's unmatched. You know what he does? He looks to the king and he says, listen, real talk. You're trying to kill me. Isma. If you want to kill me, this is how you will be successful in killing. And he's doing this in the palace with all the ministers of the king around. And he says, since you're trying to kill me, go ahead and assemble all of the people of our nation and let it be that they are witnessing firsthand you killing me. And the only thing that I stipulate is that if you want to be successful in killing me, that you use my arrow and that you declare Bismillah Rabbil Ghulam. That in the name of Allah, the Lord of the boy, I take the life of this boy. That he's a sacrifice being done in the name of Allah, the Lord of the boy. What is he doing in the process of making that statement? He's negating himself as the Lord. And he assembles the people and he brings them forward. And Allah Ta'ala has it be from, and these are karamat. If you look at what's happening in Gaza and in different parts of the world, you'll see karamat firsthand, like miracles of Allah. Allah Ta'ala had it that every single person witnessing this was able to do what? Hear the king say, in the name of Allah, the boy, the Lord of the boy. And he let go of the arrow exactly as the boy instructed him to. And with that arrow, it went exactly on his temple. And the boy touched it. And as soon as the boy placed his hand on the wound of his own arrow, he collapsed right there. And it instantaneously, everyone that's watching began to say, Amanna billah rabbil ghulam. Amanna billah rabbil ghulam. We believe in Allah, the Lord of the boy. That, dear brothers and sisters, is exactly what success is. Success is something Allah has already placed in your heart. And that is La ilaha illallah, Muhammadur Rasulullah. You already have the greatest success that this dunya can offer.
Tariq,
Take it, Sheikh.
you have to think also about the contrast.
Mm.
So the boy ends up becoming successful because even in a worldly sense, the entire nation, salvation potentially, La ilaha illallah, his martyrdom. So he becomes a martyr. The people are guided. This is success. When if he had never become involved with the rahib, he would have been rich, powerful, he would have been famous, his family would have been rich. And so every time I review that story, I always think to myself, this was a person literally on his way to school. I'm on my way to school. I'm on my way to Hogwarts. My son loves Harry Potter. I'm on my way to school. And I encounter, and I think, so I think that in school I'm learning a trade which will guarantee for me success. And on my way to school, I acquire success through my interaction and engagement with someone that had nothing. Someone that had actually taken an oath of poverty. That's what it means to be a monk, to take an oath of poverty. Right? Monks don't own it. And it was through that that he actually attained. It's really a phenomenal pass, يعني, like a reflection.
You're always deep, Sheikh.
No, no.
And I think about that moment when they just erupted in Shahada, in Amanna Billah Rabbil Ghulam. Like that moment, you just think about this lifeless body of a child, 14 years old, and you think of the world around him entering Islam. And it wouldn't be far-fetched to hone in on that picture of the lifeless body. But what you might miss is the sounds of everyone saying Amanna Billah. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has us living through a time when we're seeing a lot of lifeless bodies. But we have yet to recognize the number of people recognizing Allah and finding life in Allah and turning back to Allah. I know of brothers right now in Umrah who they literally told me, I never in my life imagined myself going to Umrah. But because of what's happening, I'm in Umrah in front of the Kaaba making dua for the people of Gaza, and who've been able to change the entire trajectory of their life because of that. So it's not only that people have entered Islam because of like those cool videos on TikTok of like random Americans who are now no longer just random Americans, but are now our brothers and sisters in faith. That's something, and that's incredible. And ذَلِكَ فَضْلُ اللَّهِ يُؤْتِيهِ مَن يَشَاءُ. But the irony is that typically when people, the enemies of Allah and Islam, try to extinguish the light of Allah, the light of Allah is such that trying to extinguish it only makes it brighter. And we're witnessing that, alhamdulillah. And so they erupted, and that's not where the story ends. Because the king becomes aware, and again, the parallels are too many, and it's just too obvious to even name. But what the king does when he realizes that everyone now has entered into La ilaha illallah is he creates a siege around the entire town of people that witness. He put them all under siege, all of them. And what does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tell us in the Quran? وَمَا نَقَمُوا مِنْهُمْ إِلَّا, tell me, أَن يُؤْمِنُوا بِاللَّهِ. The only thing that disgusted the king, disturbed the king, the only accusation that was against these people who've been sitting in prisons unjustifiably, incarcerated from 8 years old to 16 years old, what is the only crime that they've committed? La ilaha illallah. To believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so he besieged the entire town because they believed in Allah. He had trenches dug, ukhdud, and placed within them a fire that was so scorching hot that birds that flew over it would immediately die and fall into that fire. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect us from the fire of the dunya and the akhirah.
Amen.
And this is when people, my dear brothers and sisters, who had not been Muslim except suwayat, who had not believed in Allah except for a matter of hours, were being lined up and put on the chopping block. You denounce your belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And one by one, thrown into the trenches. Let's be honest, why? Because of something that you and I already have. Faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And as they're thrown into the trenches, that moment that is not, subhanallah, very far from the moments that we see and witness happening right now as we speak in Gaza. A mother holding her child, afraid. She was, in fact, in one of the narrations, it says, she says, give me some time to finish nursing my child, then throw me into the fire. And as she finished nursing her child the last time, she was trying to see if she can put the child on the side so that she can go, so that at the very least her eyes could be protected from witnessing her own child burn in the fire. And ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless all of you with children and for them to grow healthy and beautiful in your lives. I want you to imagine for a moment a mother being tasked with throwing herself and her child in the fire. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala causes one of the greatest miracles to happen. And the child speaks, not only to be heard by his mother, but to be heard by the mothers of Gaza today, to be heard across the world in every place of oppression. ittaqillah wasbiri. Remember Allah and be patient, my mother. Allah's promise is true. And at the moment, أنت على الحق, you are upon truth. نحن على الحق, he says. In fact, we are upon truth. And because we are upon truth, this is a sacrifice worth making. And at that moment, when they left this world, they all of those barriers of deception. Remember what did we say? Basar and basira, the sight of the heart. It's all removed. And what's apparent becomes what wasn't apparent has now become completely apparent. I know that we've taken so much of all of your time, but I want to hand it over to Sheikh. There's like again, so many lessons, so many reflections. But just as we kind of close the actual story, I want to hear like what are some parts of this ending in particular, Sheikh?
Bismillah. I think that one of the dangers of having a connection with an oppressed people is that sometimes we what's called valorize them, and we make them heroes, we make them martyrs without realizing the full extent of their humanity. So I read this book called The Water Dancer that Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote. It was a pretty good book. But what he was trying to do, it was a work of fiction, but what he was trying to do with the traditional slave narrative about, enslaved, African Americans was give you a glimpse of the humanity of these people. Were mothers and brothers and people that had hopes and dreams and ambitions so that he could interrupt this tendency just to see them as kind of like these martyrs, these people that that didn't feel, that just had to display this strength, and we are inspired by that. And I was thinking about some of what I hear in terms of the way that we've talked about the carnage in Gaza. Like some of us, not intentionally, but we have talked about them without really acknowledging difficulty and the extent of the sacrifice. It's like, don't turn these people into mascots for da'wah. They're straight, they're giving that. No, 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 no. So when you read the story of Ashab al-Ukhdud, even though these were people that were ready to sacrifice everything, the concern that a mother has for her child, that's human. It's like, even if I'm prepared to die for my faith, at least put my baby. Don't kill my baby. Like that, I like the realness in the story. That, which for me is an indication of the truth of Sayyidina Rasulullah alayhi salam. Because it would be easy to say they had complete faith. She took the baby, threw the baby in first, and then she jumped in. But no. That's even for people of strong faith. That's not how things really work. You think I want my life to be disrupted, upended, ended prematurely because I believe in truth? Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, yeah, this is what I want. But if Allah brings this to me, and this is the ibtila, this is the test, may Allah make us faithful. This is not, I didn't say, my life's goal is to be a symbol for the global Muslim community of resistance and hope. No, my life's goal was maybe to become a nurse. I just wanted to get married and harvest my olive trees or something. Like maybe that was just to watch my child grow up, and that was my life goal. But this is what Allah brought to me. It. A robot. I'm a human being.
In fact, Iman does the opposite, right? Like one of the things that we've talked about before, Sheikh, is the fact that having Iman does not dismiss our humanity. What did we say it does? It amplifies our humanity. So to understand that the people of Gaza are feeling fully the death of their loved one, they're feeling fully the carnage, the destruction, they're feeling fully the fear of having an occupier come and tear it down. But it is exactly what you're mentioning, Sheikh, this idea that, but what Allah brings to us, our hearts have the capacity to withstand. It's exactly that hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, in which he says, إِنَّ الْعَيْنَ لَتَدْمَعُ وَإِنَّ الْقَلْبَ لَيَحْزَنُ وَمَا نَقُولُ إِلَّا مَا يُرْضِي رَبَّنَا. Faith does not dismiss humanity.
Absolutely.
It gives treatment for a humanity that's in crisis when it's in crisis.
You know, the fact that as she is preparing for martyrdom, she's still a concern. I acknowledge that this is my ending, but my child. So that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala causes the child to speak. Like, ittaqillah wasburi. Nahnu ala al-haq. Anti ala al-haq in one riwayah. God, be patient. You are upon the truth. We are upon the truth.
May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us from the people of the truth. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help us to be the people of the truth, to stand with the truth. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as we are just about 100 days on the outskirts of Ramadan, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows us to make it to the month of Ramadan. Allahumma ballighna Ramadan. Allahumma ballighna Ramadan. Allahumma ballighna Ramadan. Oh Allah, we ask of you to give us life through the Quran, to give us life through our prayers. We beg of you, O Allah, that you give us life through our worship. We beg of you, O Allah, to better the state of our health, to better the state of our spiritual health, to better the state of our hearts, to better the state of our minds, to better the state of our community. We beg of you, O Allah, to wipe away the tears of the mothers who've lost their children, Ya Allah. O Allah, give comfort to their hearts, Ya Allah. O Allah, allow those children to be under the care of Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam. We beg of you, O Allah, Anta akramul akrameen. You are the most generous. You are the source of all love. We beg of you, O Allah, to allow us the honor of being in the company of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. O Allah, we beg of you to make us from those who follow the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam until the end of time. And we beg of you, O Allah, to forgive us for our shortcomings and mistakes. There are those of us that are struggling in so many different ways, Ya Allah. Struggling with the Quran, struggling with hijab, struggling with our prayers, struggling with the masjid, Ya Allah. There are those of us that are struggling with making ends meet. Ya Allah, there are those of us that are struggling with school. Ya Allah, no one knows the reality of what's happening in our hearts but you. Ya Allah, we beg of you to make easy for us our affairs, Ya Allah. And we beg of you, O Allah, to handle the oppressors of the world in the manner that's most befitting of them, Ya Allah. And we ask of you, O Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to grant us a salah in Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa with our loved ones in a liberated Masjid Al-Aqsa, Ya Allah. And we beg of you, O Allah, to grant us the honor of being in the company of the Prophet ﷺ in the highest of Jannah. هذا والله أعلم وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين.
Jazakallah khair, Sheikh Ubaydullah and Sheikh Tariq.